It's a little after 1 p.m. and you've tuned in to New Health Radio on KMUZ 88.5 FM. I'm your host, Nate Darnell, joined by my co-host and engineer, Dave Duncan.
Hey, Nate.
How are you doing, Duncan?
Good.
Great. Well, today we have a fabulous guest in studio, Ann Summer. She's the CEO and director of Healthy in Oregon. As I just shared, you're doing some great things in Oregon with an organization called Healthy in Oregon.
Yep.
What I'd like to do is learn a little bit more about your background, your passion, what got you involved in kind of the health and wellness. I don't know if it's a profession or if it's kind of a lifelong endeavor. So why don't we just start there? And I'd like to learn, and so would my listeners, about your background.
Great. So I come at health and wellness perhaps from a bit of a different perspective. First of all, I'm deeply, deeply impassioned about health and wellness. I have been since I was 3 years old. My father was my hero. I adored him, and he ended up at the age of 27 being identified with a brain tumor that was filling half of the volume of his skull. He ended up within 7 years being blind, deaf, and paralyzed from the treatments, and then he lived over 40 years that way.
Wow.
Yeah. He had 36 major brain surgeries. I used to change those bandages. I figured out right away I didn't want to be a doctor or a nurse, but I was committed to a life of health and wellness. And so I lived my life that way, having no idea what wellness was or how to accomplish health. I simply had to write my book in terms of my behaviors around wellness, my learning, and so forth.
And your book meaning your life story?
My life's my way of being, I will say.
Sure. Well, I looked briefly at your biography, and you have a really interesting past. There are actually corollaries between ours. And my grandmother, interestingly enough, she was a C4 quadriplegic. She developed polio 3 months after the vaccination was released, shortly after my father was born. So he never knew her outside of an iron lung. And she survived 16 years in that capacity. So she was a very, very strong woman. So to a degree, I understand a little bit, but I was not first generation like you were in terms of dealing with a parent in that capacity. But it seemed as though you had a background either in physics or in the tech world as well for a brief period of time before you kind of went both feet into health and wellness. And that's similar in my background as well. But it seems like you were under the tutelage of one of Einstein's.
Heisenberg. Right.
Yeah,
a protege of Heisenberg. So I have wended in and out. I'll talk a little bit about my professional past now. Wended in and out of health and wellness for a while. When I was in my 20s, I was introduced to the work of a brilliant astrophysicist and studied his works directly for 15 years. During that time, I had one-on-one tutelage from the physicist who's a protege of Heisenberg. The introduction to me of physics and the way that I studied physics was not just nuts and bolts and figures and calculations and so forth. It was a truly comprehensive approach in which we understood or would come to understand the lives of the physicists, the philosophies that guided them, the influences of society, down sometimes to the smallest details, because the great innovators of the world are people like you and me.
Sure.
And so I came to understand the unity of our influences and of our society upon the smallest details of our lives. So that powerfully influenced me. I started oddly from Copernicus, and then went back to Thales, very, very, very long time ago. He's the earliest known scientist. And then forward to the modern age. I spent 3 years as a founding board member of what was probably the first private complexity-based institute in America, and then came to understand complexity science, which was to a extremely limited degree. But my approach to physics is to understand how progress itself is made from this study, which is the one and only predictably successful body of knowledge that humanity has ever arrived at.
Wow. So, just in a nutshell, this is the first time I've heard the term complexity science. So, explain to me just within like 15, 20 seconds, and for the listeners, just because I don't want to dwell on this too much, but I'm curious now. What is this?
So complexity science is simply the body of knowledge that looks at extremely high numbers of individuals in interaction with one another. Complexity science can include everything from clouds and weather systems to traffic patterns to neuronal connections and interactions in the human brain. Things that come in tremendous, tremendous numbers, in fact, act differently than in smaller numbers. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think in the big scheme of things, you're looking at the big picture. You're looking at all of these interconnected kind of variables and how they play out.
Right.
And I think personally, this same thing holds true in health and wellness. Because I find that in the Western world, we tend to focus on one or two things and we're not paying attention to the bigger picture. So I think this dovetails right into what we're going to talk about shortly is, what's wrong kind of with Western medicine and what needs to be done so that instead of as a country spending more money than any other nation in the world on healthcare that's based around disease treatment only and a small, very limited number of factors to something that really looks at the human being as a whole. And we focus on optimal wellness, not just on disease treatment. And how can we do it cost effectively?
I personally believe that as financially valuable as sickness now is, it doesn't even begin to scratch the surface when it comes to what we are capable of generating. Again, I'm only speaking financially at this point, when we are well and producing. So how can we transform toward a culture of wellness so we're spending more? I'll tell you in a nutshell, it's this one word, responsibility. So I mean that not as an accusation to anyone, but a responsibility. I often say that, I tell my clients that it doesn't matter how many conditions you have, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. We live in a society that beckons and cultivates sickness instead of cultivating wellness. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. So in order to accept responsibility and take leadership over our health and wellness, we have to gain valid knowledge. And there's so much out there that is just bunk. So we have to distinguish between valid and invalid knowledge, which means essentially choosing your experts, following the line and seeing how it works for you, so you can then take responsibility and embed it in your life.
So it sounds like you're referring to evidence-based research in a way, because, and this is where my line of thinking is too, which is there's a lot of bunk out there. There really is. But there's also a lot of great stuff. And
thank goodness.
Thank goodness. And what's so frustrating for me sometimes is that even when we find the great stuff, sometimes Western healthcare professionals, they're not open-eared about it.
Right.
And that gets really frustrating.
So I think we need, when we're confused about what's going on in healthcare, we need to look at a couple different things. First of all, does it heal? Okay, not does it treat and does it suppress symptoms, but does it heal? And the other thing we need to look at is where's the money?
Follow the money trail.
I'm not saying anything new, but when I emerged from so many years of studying science, I was not working, at least not very often, in wellness at that point. I had worked in IT in the 90s in Seattle. That was pretty fun for a while. Not as interesting as science, though, let me tell you. And when I emerged and went back into my deepest passion, which is health and wellness, and I looked at what was happening in our society, I was stupefied. The only way to reconcile what was happening in healthcare, the only vantage point from which it actually works, is financially. And that is for a very small number of people.
Yeah. I saw something. My colleagues, one of my research colleagues, Megan Garcia, and I, we started several years ago looking at some alternative technologies, and predominantly for use with regard in relation to arthritis suppression, osteoporosis suppression, diabetes suppression, and we started investigating other technologies that were available from around the world. And in that process, I learned about the history of the Japan's medical system, which was very interesting to me because they had 2,000 years of their own kind of medicinal practices. After World War II, everything was devastated.
Right.
And they were completely demilitarized, de-weaponized. They were a very proud people, but as our nation was committed to controlling them, and I think to the point to where the Japanese at that time were genuinely fearful of genocide or ethnic annihilation if they continued to fight back.
Wow, I did not know that.
And so what they implemented was the only defense that they had to preserve their culture was strength in numbers. And they created the most progressive disease prevention-based business model in the world. And their longevity, which is often spoken about, didn't happen prior to World War II.
Oh, interesting.
Prior to World War II, they didn't live any longer than the rest of us, and probably around 60 or 70 years of age. After World War II, we began to see these really extraordinary longevity or in both men and women. And what it boiled down to was this overall approach, which was based entirely around disease prevention. And 2 weeks out of every year, they took the important people in the community, the policymakers, the engineers, city planners, you name it. They would put them in a forced stay in a hospital for 2 weeks.
Oh, what a great idea.
And they scrutinized them from top to bottom, warding off any potential ailments that were coming their direction. And they maintain that to this day. The way in which it's implemented is slightly different based on certain technical innovations, and they don't have to stay nearly as long. I think they can get the same investigations and assays done within 2 days compared to 2 weeks, what they used to do. And that was in stark contrast to the United States, which didn't have any real history, according to us, aside from the Native Americans, which had their own medicinal practices, which we completely ignored. And then we implemented, starting in the early 1900s, in my opinion, is that it was really put forth by a group of businessmen who were industrialists in the 1800s and superimposed their business model on top of Western medicine. And instead of being driven towards optimal wellness and the strength of the nation's people, it was driven more towards the strength of the bottom line.
Right.
And that's why, in my opinion, what we see more frequently now are solutions offered by Western medicine that are patentable, controllable, and that's why instead of relying more on traditional herbal remedies, which have thousands of years of history behind them, like turmeric, for instance,
Right.
we rely on synthetic patentable medications, which oftentimes come with all kinds of nasty side effects and other medical dependencies or other medications. Dependencies on other medications. And it's public knowledge that Lipitor netted billions of dollars for the company that made it. And there are also complications with statin drugs.
Tremendous, devastating complications of statin drugs. I would refer listeners to Beatrice Golom's fantastic work. She's MD, PhD, hero of mine. She graduated from Harvard at the age of 19 in physics. Got her PhD and MD over the next 4 or 5 years. She's considered a foremost authority internationally on the adverse side effects of statins, and she did a meta-study out maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, in which she culled only the top 891 studies on the adverse effects of statins. So I want to ask, why are there 891 studies more than that qualified for a meta-study? And she makes observations at the end, one of which is that no one in any condition, no matter what their heart history has been or is expected to be, should be on a statin after the age of 70 because the side effects, the adverse effects are so profoundly negative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even one of our own almost 2 decades ago, one of our own astronauts, U.S. astronauts, Dr. Dwayne Graveline. I think he was an Air Force surgeon, I think.
Yeah.
That was his background. He was one of the first individuals to really suffer immediately after taking statins. It was notable,
Memory
and
problems.
he was having minor strokes, and it disqualified him from participating until he could get until he stopped taking until they found out what the issue was, and so they removed him from statins, and all of a sudden his symptoms went away.
Wow.
But a lot of that was suppressed by the media and perhaps by the companies that manufactured that solution.
Sure.
And they continued to sell as much as they could until their patent rights ran out. So
I would like to say something about a reference you made a little bit earlier. I used to think, too, that that the challenge is modern and fairly local. And I spent a year and a half studying the history of business in America from 1800s and so forth. And I made some assumptions about where this challenge for healthcare, the primary deep philosophical challenge, came from. I was very surprised when I discovered that this dichotomy, that there is a dichotomy going on that is thousands of years old already. Here's an example. The Greeks named a god Asclepius, and Asclepius was the god of medicine. And Asclepius's belief was that that a doctor's responsibility is that of treating sickness. Now, he also had multiple daughters, one of whom was Hygeia, and she was a real firebrand. And she said, "No, Papa, that is not a doctor's primary responsibility. A doctor's primary responsibility is to teach wellness, and when she fails, then she has to treat the sickness that she caused." So that Hygeia's approach, which of course the word comes from hygiene, right? Hygeia's approach has been profoundly suppressed through many societies for a very long time because it requires a sense of responsibility and a sense of control, which is counterproductive to a sense of omniscience and control over others. Does that make sense?
completely.
So here we are in the modern age at the very edge, the farthest flung application of Asclepius's approach, and it is failing massively. For some reason, I felt comforted knowing that this wasn't our own problem that we invented in modern times, but that goes way, way back and is a foundational human challenge. When we look at it from that vantage point, then we can stop trying to figure out who's to blame, identify what is to blame, and get to work.
Well, that brings us into the next portion of our conversation, which is how do we do that? What can we do locally? And I'd like to learn more about what you've done in that regard and the organization that you put together called Healthy in Oregon.
Healthy in Oregon. Okay. Healthy in Oregon is a budding hybrid social entrepreneurial business venture. We will be seeking B Corp status when the time is right. B Corp simply allows us, it's a new corporate structure that allows for the officers of a corporation to see to the long-term well-being of their financial interests, of course, but on equal footing with the contribution that they make to their societies and the well-being of their employees as well. So hybrid is a nonprofit and a for-profit together, each of them doing their own independent work, but working synergistically together. So I started working on the nonprofit work first, even though it will be a couple months now until the nonprofit is actually formed and has its own wings. We started implementing brain-based physical activity programs for elementary school children. So very simple programs that prepare children for a successful session of learning, a successful day of learning. Because no matter how adamant the regulations are about tests children take, and no matter how beautiful and cutting-edge curriculum may be, if the child's brain is not ready to learn, the learning is not going to be very high quality.
That's exactly right.
And we know that certain types of physical activity stuff the brain full of this beautiful neurotrophin called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And BDNF is called the master learning molecule. It's called the CEO of the brain. And BDNF controls serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, all of these beautiful neurotransmitters that make us feel good and learn well.
So what downregulates that or turns it off? So if what you're doing is increasing that so they can turn it on and really be engaged, what things are we doing on a daily basis if we're not informed about this that could be turning that down and impairing our learning?
Sitting on our tushes for too long, okay? Failing to expose ourselves to new inputs, including being outside, new learning, new thoughts, and of course, junk food. I wish we had a sign here, I would show it. When I say junk food, I mean like big pharma, big food, PHOOD, okay, that kind of stuff. It is not food, it is not natural, and it suppresses all of the healthful, natural processes and systems in the human body, including the development of BDNF.
So I would hazard to guess that the standard American student lunch falls into, that definition. Based on what I've learned about the USDA and all of the government contracts delivering the food to the school lunch.
So I developed the Healthy in Oregon programs specifically so we are not dependent at any point upon deeply entrenched systems, okay? Because deeply entrenched systems, whether they are government or non, okay, are already getting more than their share of the goodies, right?
Sure.
They're not going to back off. And the development often change is so cumbersome. We're talking about children's brains forming fully. We don't have time to hang around bureaucracy for that. We need to get our children out and moving, and I feel that it is our responsibility, particularly in the nonprofit portion of Healthy in Oregon, to simply share this information, share it with children, share it with parents, and share it with educators. So we've been doing what I call demonstration projects to show that the concept actually works. There's data all around the country and now all around the world about the academic performance, the intellectual performance improvements from only one change, and that is sufficient amounts of basic physical activity, and not generic physical activity, specific kinds. You need to get your heart moving. You need to do cross-lateral work. Music is perfect.
Right.
Yeah, we just need to get, with the nonprofit work right now that Health in Oregon is doing, we simply need to get that message out to the right audiences. And another thing we know from change theory, social learning change theory is a powerful tool for implementing social change. What we know is that you have to start with major groups, major influential groups, and groups who will be planting the seeds for the future, and that is our children.
So for the listeners, Anne, if you could just explain change theory, just kind of in a nutshell.
Change theory was developed first by Albert Bandura in the 1950s. He had a change. He was slated to help some farmers make a change. They wanted to have nothing to do with him, even though this change would have improved their lives measurably. So he went back and started studying how do Americans respond to change. And the body of knowledge made its way first through business. What he found out, for example, is that there are 5 categories of response to innovation in America, probably applicable internationally. But there's the innovator. Very, very small percentage of us are innovators at any given time, 1, 2, 3%. There are the early adopters. The early adopters may be up to 15% of a population. They are the only ones that the innovator talks to. And then the next category up, maybe 30%, the early majority, they get all their information from the early adopter. Then there's the late majority. Of course, they look to the early majority. And then there are the laggards, the last 15% or so. They don't want to change. They don't care who you are. They don't care how good it is. When you want to change, you must go to the group that can leverage the influence the most. And who influences others is naturally his breathing. So in a social change like this, we must focus on empowering the innovators who are plugged into this topic already, wellness, okay? And then give them the early adopters that they need. The early adopters are translators for the innovators, and the early adopters naturally communicate, and other people naturally look to them. Now that's, in a nutshell, that's only one type of change theory. There are other types. We use those also in Healthy in Oregon, but that's the big dog.
I like that description. And a couple of years ago, I think you were on Capitol Hill, or you were kind of influential in getting some legislation passed through. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and kind of where that went, just as an example of some of the challenges in working through our political system, and perhaps one of the reasons why you designed your organization to be completely self-sufficient?
Yes, be happy to talk about that. I would like to extend gratitude to the former Senator Bill Morissette, because he grabbed me by the arm and he said, we're working together. He's the one who is to be credited with getting junk foods out of schools, junk food vending machines, junk food machines. When he heard about my talk about the latest neuroscience research on the impact of physical activity upon the brain, learning, intellect, and so forth, then he had me present that to the House and Senate Education Committees. We got a law passed, thanks to him, brilliantly written, very simple. Of course, it doesn't have a whole lot of teeth. But we did get a law passed unanimously in both houses, and it was passed into law under a state of emergency in 2009 that simply requires the Oregon Department of Education in certain circumstances to participate when they are presented with projects tying together physical activity and academic performance. So this, as I say, this law is up my sleeve. And when the time is right, then we will seek to take action on that. Now, all of this happened inside of 6 months, a very unusual circumstance. I know that laws can take years, if not decades, to pass. But if the primary criteria for transforming toward wellness, both as a society and as individuals, is figuring out what you can do, another word for that is responsibility, then what we cannot afford to do is to leave it up to legislators, corporations, non-governmental organizations to make our changes for us. That will never happen.
Right.
We must take responsibility. All of these organizations are ultimately reactive. And when we as individuals are taking responsibility in great enough numbers and deeply enough, we change our society. I love what Margaret Mead said, that I'm messing up her quotation, but something along the lines of never disbelieve that a group of committed citizens will
a very small group of things, something along those lines, a very small group of committed citizens
will be able to make the change. And that's us. And so what I see my responsibility as is I'm the entrepreneur bringing the experts together, and I'm the integrator. We have every single piece of wellness that we need in front of us right now, but the pieces are not working together. I think of knowledge, for example, in the many bodies of knowledge that we need to bring together to transform toward wellness. I think of them as in silos, right? These great big huge bins that are 5 stories high and fairly narrow, and so the expertise is deep, as it must be. But no one is integrating yet. Everyone is seeing, oh, how much of the piece of the pie can I get for myself? And we're not cross-pollinating. So this was a profound influence that complexity science thinking has upon my thinking, and that is that in order to make the greatest progress, you must integrate. We must integrate systems. So here we are. We need to integrate systems. We have the information that we need. We cannot wait for other gigantic, gargantuan, deeply entrenched organizations to change. For us, we need to change ourselves. And so I structured the for-profit work for Healthy in Oregon The first phase of this work is called Phase 1 Portal, like the open door. And we conduct 10-week whole life transformative wellness projects. And in these projects, we embrace all of the major components of wellness. People learn in learning community sessions weekly. We dive deeply into the science behind these major components of wellness and then implement immediately. So some of the major components of wellness: breath, obviously essential, number one. Okay, we don't hang around sitting, meditating, and breathing. Sounds nice to me, but most people, that's not going to be. But simply, we still must pay attention to breath. We must pay attention to water. We must pay attention to sleep, first of all. Those are the first three components of wellness, not exercise and food. Exercise and food are food number 4, exercise number 5. But if we don't master the first most important bodily functions, then those things are made harder fantastically.
You're listening to New Health Radio on KMUZ 88.5 FM, and I'm interviewing Ann Summers, the founder of Healthy in Oregon. What I'd like to do now is learn a little bit more about the organization, and I think there are 2 demographics that you focus on right now. You have
Children?
Well, children, but projects happening inside the school systems. And then you're focusing on an older demographic for brain health. And maybe it's brain health across, both aspects, because I know it's so important in the educational system to get everyone prepped for learning. And then it's so important as you age to maintain that elasticity in your brain. So you're constantly keeping that muscle strong. And your brain it may not technically be defined as a muscle, but we know that if you don't use it, you do lose it.
Boy, that is so true. That is so true. So yes, we have the children in the learning readiness physical activity programs where we lead with brain health. We also lead with brain health in the adult 10-week whole life transformative wellness projects called performance wellness projects. Interestingly, these projects, since they're not focused on sickness, and we don't practice medicine, even though we do have medical professionals on our professional team, since this is not about sickness, some super, super healthy people have participated in our project, and we will continue to attract really super healthy people because it does not matter where you are going to jump to your own next level of wellness. You will see improvements such as greater mental acuity, a serious cessation, reduction for most people in many, many physical ailments and constraints. Stress, definitely. We focus throughout on the value of meditation and what happens in the brain and how to use meditation. And I, when I say meditation, I'm not making a political statement. I am not making a religious statement. This is biophysiological improvements from this thing that we call meditation. Maybe we need a different name for it so it's disconnected from any religious connotation. So we have had several doctors in our projects now. All of them already wellness oriented, but they come here to come to their own next level. We have a project finishing up in Eugene right now, and we have an Olympic trainee who participated and saw some tremendous improvements, everything from blood pressure reduction of about 15 points to body fat reduction, strength increases off the edge. And while his whole family around him suffered typical allergy symptomology this year, he did not. And when he told them what he thought was up, because he was participating in this project, they didn't quite believe that. But he's a believer because he's experiencing it. So a great range of people. We've also had people from 25 to 74 start in our projects. I'm still working with the 74-year-old. She's 76 now. She just got a physical from her doctor whom she's been working with for 15 years, saying that biologically she's showing up as a 62-year-old. We're not practicing medicine. This is wellness.
Wow, that's profound.
Yeah.
Okay, so where are you going now? If we're looking into the future with Healthy in Oregon, and now that you're kind of in the incubation stage and doing
Yes.
this planning, what's the
Yes.
future look like?
Well, I have all kinds of exciting plans. We have an angel investor or two hovering around the edges, serious investment potential. We do need to grow more to grow up to that potential. I plan to carry Healthy in Oregon, myself and my team, throughout all of Oregon. We just started a performance wellness project in Lake Oswego. We're going to be starting another in Eugene soon and planning to come to Salem, Kaiser, and Corvallis by this fall. So all I need is for people to show interest, and enough people to show interest. Then we start a project. If I had maybe 10 people or so saying, okay, I want an intro, there's a free 90-minute intro that anybody can go to, where they get the lay of the land, they find out what the Performance Wellness Project is about, and then I will carry it out and get enough people to actually start a project. We like our projects to have about 20, 25 people in them. So that's, in a nutshell, how we grow in different areas. But since this needs to happen, we need to learn to take leadership over our own health and wellness nationally.
Right.
Then I have long since scooped up all of the Healthy Inn names across the country. Own them all.
So we're going to be healthy in the country.
Yes, we are. Yes, we will. So what we do when we go into areas is we look for the early adopters. They're automatically attracted to what we have. And so we just cater to them, make sure they have what they need, give them, just surround them with everything that they possibly need to make this serious transformation toward wellness.
Sure. Do you have plans on working directly with healthcare professionals such as medical doctors as you go into these communities? And what has their response been up to this point? Are they embracing you? Are they kind of questioning? Do you have kind of give and take? What's the lay of the land there?
Everything. So first of all, I will say that on our Performance Wellness Projects professional team, we always have a wellness-oriented doc. We have a PhD holistic nutritionist. We have a neuroscientist. We have a trainer, and we have a wellness coach. So people are really surrounded individually and in the learning community with wellness. So about the docs, we have some different professional team members in different areas. And just as there are some doctors who are traditional and traditional only and not terribly open, they're like the laggards. Right?
I like that description.
So we don't go there. Waste of time. We're not speaking the same language. And then there are early adopters. They're already there. They're already wellness oriented. They have functional medicine specialties. And that's right. They're pushing the envelope. So one of the tricky things is that sickness pays. Sickness even pays wellness-oriented medical professionals.
Yeah.
So if they are really, really psychologically committed to making money from sickness, then even wellness professionals will give me some pushback. I understand that, but we're going beyond. We need to learn how to generate financial benefit from wellness, and that is what I am here to do as a business professional.
I think what I've learned about working with Western physicians and in some of the projects that we've worked on, they're very concerned about liability. And
is it fair to say CYA medicine on the air?
I think you can use that acronym. I'm not sure we should spell out the words. And even those that are well-intentioned, I think they're terrified of losing their license. So it's been my experience that they will do things with themselves and their own personal families that they would never prescribe clinically.
And they cannot. Right.
And so I would like to, in a way, although I've had my same frustrations with some physicians, there are many that are just so dedicated to community health, and they feel stifled by the current bureaucracy around Western medicine, and they feel like they're being dictated to by insurance companies. They feel like they're being, told how to practice medicine by pharmaceutical companies.
Right.
And after they've spent 20 years going to school,
Right.
10 years in practice, finally 30 years in, they finally find themselves with some degree of discretionary income and a little bit of
Right.
sleep because they've been sleep deprived for 30 years. And they don't really want to buck the system. And in a way, I can understand that. I can
Me
totally
too.
understand that.
I do too.
So I think what you're doing is creating this bridge where if you'll go out there and pioneer it and be, a first mover and a motivator, and you can demonstrate the safety factor, then I think they will fall in behind. So long as there's that comfort level and you can demonstrate a lack or a reduction in liability because you've already proven that it works, then I think you will find many more that will adopt later on.
I think so too. It is an honor to be a part of all of this. And I want to say that there is no way under the sun I could do what I do without standing on the shoulders of giants, most of whom are medical doctors or medical researchers. I am profoundly, profoundly grateful for the heroes from history and the heroes alive right here in our communities today saying, I care, I dare to care, and it's dangerous for me. I understand that. Many medical professionals not only feel that they are being dictated to by the financial interests in whatever their cloak, but they are, and they are threatened. And they can be drugged behind a team of horses professionally, so to speak. And it's horrific, and I know doctors going through this, and is profoundly unfair. In terms of change itself, this is how change happens much of the time. The individuals pay the price. So these doctors and nurses and others, researchers who are leading the cutting edge and saying the truth, telling when the emperor has no clothing, they are heroes. And they deserve our accolades, and they deserve our praise, and they deserve our business. So.
Well, I see two ways that we can help them. I see some of the older practitioners who have really strong skill sets and a lot of experience, and they want to retire.
Yeah.
Not that they financially want to, but they are so bogged down by the toxicity in the environment.
Right.
They want to go work with someone who actually does produce results and gives them the freedom to practice the way that they want to. And then the younger physicians, they don't know any better. They're like the kids that have been raised on junk food. They don't know what real food is actually like, or they've been raised on junk technology that's designed with engineered obsolescence in mind. So you throw it away every 2 or 3 years and buy another one. They don't remember when things were actually made by real engineers that lasted for 20 or 30 years and could be infinitely refurbished. So I think perhaps, as you're blazing a trail out there, if there's these two demographics with these physicians, because ultimately, if this is really going to move the nation, and I hope it does, and I'll do anything that I can to assist in that. We need their support as well.
Yes, we do. The ones who get the concept of wellness and can get outside of their own, like Einstein said,
Get out of their own way.
Want to focus on not the merely personal, but to actually be able to contribute. Yes. So those who have grown enough personally as individuals and human beings to say, okay, I'm working for the bigger picture now. I think I'm okay personally. I'm working for the bigger picture. Maslow's hierarchy of
needs.
Needs, exactly. These are the people. These are early adopters. They come in all sizes, shapes, ages, professions, personalities. But they can see the future, and they want the future that is favorable rather than unfavorable. I mean, I honestly believe that we may be bifurcating as a species. We may be splitting in two as a species right now at this juncture in time. And one group is going to go forward on nature's path, where nature has had us, at least according to my belief system, has been building life us up to what we are right now for 3.5 billion years. Do you think she knows what she's doing? Okay? And then there's the other group that says it has nothing to do with what I eat, has nothing to do with my health. Okay, that's an experiment. If they're not willing to be open-minded enough to question their own, then that's how it goes. And there's entire societies built around both of those.
Yeah, I think the whole debate surrounding GMOs right now falls squarely in the middle of that.
Perfect.
And one of the, his name is David Suzuki? Is it David Suzuki? Japanese biogeneticist. He's, I think he has like 26 honorary degrees. The man,
Good heavens.
The man is brilliant, but he speaks very openly about the challenges facing GMOs. Not that they're inherently evil, but the fact that we have not engaged in nearly enough science to prove what the long-term ramifications are. And in many ways, legislation. There's a term that I heard recently, that there's a prohibition against science on Capitol Hill. and it's kind of like the science is selectively adopted in order to satisfy political and marketing agendas. And it really needs to be the reverse direction. It really needs to be that the science can't change. I mean, that we will learn more as science progresses, but the marketing really has to be built around the science and not vice versa. And
here's what's going to help. That dynamic, I do not believe we're going to change, but it will implode upon itself, all right? So now science is geared toward the quarterly report. That's absurd.
it is absurd.
And it is impossible. So they have to fudge the science.
Yep.
But you know how physics is integrated. Newton integrated physics, and from that came Maxwell's incredible work and then Einstein's incredible work. So now we have 3 integrations in physics. That simply means that there's an anchor upon which to test knowledge, so you can pretty much figure out whether something is going to work beforehand, before you even build it. Okay. Because of that one integration, we have the entire technological world that we live in right now. All right. Biology has not been integrated. It's a mess of bricks. And they don't stand very well. We have incredible knowledge, the bricks, but we have nothing to pull it together. And so that leaves us exposed to tremendous fraud and manipulation. We have no means of testing accurately using scientific principles for testing for accuracy, and certainly not for precision. When biology is integrated, and I know that there are scientists working on this is the deep, abstract, there's no bottom line return even anticipated for the next 100 years type science. Okay, when biology is integrated, fraud will be virtually impossible. And then all of this gimmickry around this treatment or that treatment or that treatment, and the shoddy science, the quarterly, the science which answers to the quarterly business reports will be dead. And we will have a chance to be truly alive.
And that is one of the most profound statements I've had on any of my shows. And on that note, I cannot follow you, and I will simply close the show on that. That is great. That is great. So in the process of bringing our show to an end, Anne, how can listeners become more informed about what you're doing? Is there a website that they can go to? Is there a Facebook page? Is there a phone number?
Yes. Call us, email us, check out our Facebook page, and in 2-3 weeks, check out our website. Okay. We'll be live. Please do pick up the phone. Send us an email. We do respond. We love to hear from you. I tell my clients all the time, you are my dream. You're my dream. This is why I live to work in helping you transform toward wellness.
What's the phone number, Anne? 541-255-3960. So 541-255-3960.
255-3960. And then you can email us at hello@healthyinoregon.com.
And website is at healthyinoregon.com?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, when we get that launched.
And can they find you on Facebook already?
Yes, Healthy in Oregon.
So-
Come like us on Facebook and jump in. We are just going live with social media. Been doing so much of this demonstration project, capturing data. We have thousands of points of data at this point, doing a lot of homework, and now it's time to go live.
Okay. Well, then with that said, we're going to go ahead and close today's show on New Health Radio on KMUZ 88.5 FM. And this has absolutely been kind of an eye-glazing, brain-swelling episode. We've covered so much. And if there are any questions or comments regarding today's show, please feel free to email us at newhealthnation@gmail.com. And tune in again next week for the next edition of New Health Radio. And until then, this is Nate Darnell wishing you well.